Hi guys! So this is a presentation by Alexa Earls, Kirsten Vela, and Julie Vernon. We're going to be talking about the art movement Fauvism today. It's one of the shorter, more obscure movements, but it's full of wonderful art and groundbreaking techniques. Many consider Fauvism to be the root of the modern art movements, such as Expressionism, Impressionism, and Cubism. We're going to start by giving you a rundown on the history of Fauvism.
Art was evolving from Impressionism towards a style heavily influenced by Van Gogh, Seurat, Gauguin, and Cézanne. At the time of Fauvism's conception in the south of France, France was in the midst of a period of industrial unrest. Derain and Vlaminck were each recruited and made to break up demonstrations and strikes during this time. Fauvism is thought to have been helped by the psychological effect of moving into a new century. People approached art with high expectations and boundless optimism. Though modern art at this time was associated more with hardship, sacrifice, and obscurity than with success. Henri Matisse, considered a founder of Fauvism, Vlaminck and Derain all submitted pieces of art to the Salon d'Automne in 1905, where Matisse was strongly advised to withdraw his garish woman in a hat from the salon. Georges de Villiers not only made sure that it was submitted, but had the Fauvist paintings hung together to make a more significant impact, and a room with a bust of Donatello in the center. Here they were first referenced as the Fauves by critic Louis Vaucher, who said, Donatello parmi les fauves, which translates to Donatello among the wild beasts, and would come to apply to the artists themselves. Charles Maurice reacted, observing that the Fauvists seemed to fulfill a widespread need to make sense out of the chaos of modern art. Fauvism benefited and flourished as an art form because of the rise of the art dealer, the emergence of an art-buying public, and new exhibition facilities. This art movement was considered largely a transitional phase for most artists, and by 1908, structure and order were re-embraced. It wasn't technically an art movement because it had no rules or rhetoric. Members were held together by friendships and a need to move on from Impressionism. However, though it was such a short-lived period, the Fauvist work was imperative to the development of abstract art in the Expressionist movement.
That is a long...
Fauvism began as ridiculed and disrespected until major art buyers, such as Gertrude Stein and her brother Leo and Ambrose Voillard, began to add them to their collections, and Fauvists began to gain respect. The public was shocked and horrified at the Salon d'Automne that the artists seemed to paint more in their own interest than the critics. Signac and fellow neo-impressionists began to resent who they saw as overzealous youth. Overall outcome for original Fauves was critical tolerance despite conservative optimism. Fauvism has been called the first movement in modern art to benefit from scandal. It made painters realize the benefit of publicity, though they were uncomfortable with the name the Fauves. The Fauvist artists worked together at different points in time. Vlaminck was influenced by a Van Gogh exhibition and met André Derain on a train in 1900, where they agreed to share a studio in Chateauvieux village in the Seine Valley. Matisse worked with Derain in the summer of 1905, using discordant color and loose brushwork to deny the recession of space or depth, confirming the flatness of the canvas surface. When they were together, Matisse and Derain wanted to learn from the style of painting like children. They over-exaggerated everything and oversimplified what should have been detailed. After working with Derain, Matisse's art was considered barbaric, as his subjects were images of pre-civilized worlds and Eden before the fall, etc. Vlaminck began exhibiting with Derain and Matisse in 1904. The Salon d'Automne allied the Fauvists and their styles together.
Came from the word fauves, which in French means wild beasts. This name was coined by the art critic Louis Vaucher when seeing the explosive color and crazy brushstrokes of Matisse and Derain at one of their exhibitions. Here are some paintings that are perfect examples of Fauvism. The first painting, done by Matisse in 1907, is called The Aloes. The second is Bathers, painted by Derain in 1906. Both use bold color and thick, strong brushstrokes to create emotion while depicting the scene. Fauvist paintings also often disregarded topographical features and had unusual points of emphasis. Though all of these features characterized Fauvism, the main point was this. There were no set programs or rules to become a Fauvist. All that mattered was that the artist used color as a way to express emotion instead of as a way to describe an object. This painting by Maurice de Blancmange, titled Banks of the Seine at Chateau, looks nothing like what the title proclaims it to be. This is because the color and composition turned a landscape into more of an abstract expression of emotion. Because the, quote, rules of Fauvism were so undefined, the Fauvists were basically a loosely acquainted group of artists in France who all happened to be experimenting with color as a way to express emotion. Some artists painted instinctively, while others calculated their use of color to create a spontaneous effect. The movement was founded and led by Henri Matisse, but some of the other more influential Fauvists included Maurice de Blancmange, Georges Rouault, and André Derain. Fauvism had a large contrast with symbolist art, which came just before, from the end of the 1800s to the beginning of the 1900s. Symbolist art, like this painting by Gustave Moreau titled Saint Sebastian and His Executioners, was much more morbid and dark than the art of Fauvism. It only stayed alive for as long as Henri Matisse kept it alive. It started in 1904, and by 1912 it was over. Matisse was concerned with the substance of things. He stressed the aesthetic value of images. They were to be replicated by taking each of these values to the extreme. This led to a translation of feelings into color, using a rough, almost clumsy style to get the maximum emotional effect. Often, paint was put onto the canvas directly from the tube. The Fauvists preferred to paint light-hearted subject matter. This included landscapes, like Saint-Tropez, painted by Matisse in 1904. The light colors and overall easy feeling conformed to the lightheartedness of the movement. Fauvists also painted carefree figures, such as in Bathers by Derain. All of the forms, including people, objects, and buildings, were overly simplified, because the main focus was on color. The style was wild and lurid, as can be seen in Woman in a Hat by Matisse. The face is blotched with green, pink, and yellow, with red and cobalt blue hair, and a giant purple hat with multicolored feathers. Used chaotic brushstrokes and sometimes globs of paint straight from the tube like the realists did. Unlike the realists, they didn't intend to remind the viewer that the work was simply a painting. If you remember, in realism, the artist tried to remind the viewer that they were looking at a painting by making their brushstrokes obvious. Though many Fauvist works look rushed and careless, they involved a lot of work and may have been reworked multiple times. The Fauvists abolished the conventional sense of distance between the canvas and the spectator. They actually tried to bring the viewer into the painting. Here, the painting by Vlaminck, Fisherman at Nanterre, is pictured. The colors are welcoming, which is a preliminary way to draw the viewer in. You can see pastel blue, a light yellow color, and happy, carefree figures positioned near the viewer, across the water from a quaint little town. The scene itself is inviting, and the way that Vlaminck positions the viewpoint serves to draw the spectator in even more. You can see the edge of the hill leading down to the water where the fishermen are gathered, which gives the viewer the feeling of actually standing on the hill with the fishermen. Each of the Fauvist artists, though part of the same movement, used different ideas in his paintings. Matisse strived for harmonic order and a joyous atmosphere. In his paintings, titled The Dance and Music, only one color was used for each element. The people were brownish beige, the ground was a dark, solid green, and the sky was blue. This confined color palette served to unite the parts of the painting in a way that was unique to Matisse. Derain, however, used deep shadows that transformed into glowing light, sharp angles, and conflicting lines. In short, his goal was to create discordant art. In this painting, called Drying the Sails, everything is incredibly vivid and fraught with contrast. You have the pitch black of the reflection of the boats in the water, and the vivid blue, yellow, and orange of the people and roads in the foreground. The gradual curve of the shoreline is contrasted with the sharp angles of the sails at the top of the painting, and the square, geometric angles of the buildings. Rouault used his trademark thick black lines in his art. In The Cashier, painted in 1907, these lines are especially vivid. They set the woman apart from the wall and the table, because the colors are all dark and murky. Without these lines, it might have been hard for the woman to be discerned from the background. As you can see, Rouault's colors in this painting weren't quite as vivid as those of Matisse or Derain, but they were still enough to classify him as Fauvist. Blancmange specialized in painting nature scenes and country roads with stormy, heavy skies. In The Bridge at Chateau, painted in 1905, the stretching road places the viewer in the painting. The landscape is typical to Fauvist art, and the lone figure diverts the focus from the vanishing point. The heavy clouds above contrast with the light brown road. Basically, although there are some characteristics of Fauvist art, each artist took the basic principles and ran with them to create his own unique art. The collection of loosely related colorful art came together to create a memorable, influential movement that influenced artists for generations to come.
Henri Matisse lived in a time of social and technological change. Many traumatic political events occurred during his life, but he never made any commentary in his paintings. Originally, he was a lawyer, and he had an interest in art at age 21. He worked as a lawyer's clerk before appendicitis changed his life. He studied at Julian Academy and École des Beaux-Arts. In 1891, he moved to Paris to study art and followed the traditional 19th century academic path. In 1895, he began exhibiting. He exhibited a dry academic matter, evident in his drawing. In 1917, he traveled to South France and settled there for the rest of his life. Henri Matisse began as an Impressionist scholar and was obsessed with Claude Monet. He also showed influence of Edward Manet and Paul Cézanne. He aimed to discover, quote, the essential character of things, and to produce an art of, quote, balance, purity, and serenity. His first attempt to make art as a reflection of states of mind was Lux Calme et Volpe. In 1904, he became interested in colored dot technique, which translated into his art. He was inspired by a brighter palette while on a fishing boat trip in southern France by using bright lighting. He learned the pointillist technique of small color dots in complementary colors from Signac and Henry Edmund Cross. The principal subject in his paintings remained the female figure or dressed in an oriental costume or in various stages of undress. They were standing, seated, or reclining in a luxurious manner. In Matisse's painting, Dance 1, he used a circle of dancers. This creates a sense of dynamic tension. His revolutionary use of color, line, and form are preceding expressionism and abstraction. Matisse says about Dance 1, quote, the whole arrangement of my painting is expressive. The place occupied by figures or objects, and the empty space, everything plays its part. In Dance 2, dancers are painted in a flat color of blue sky against a green hill. This stretches across the canvas, almost bursting out in rhythmic movement. Dance 1 was criticized for its flatness, lack of perspective, and crudeness of form. Matisse's next painting, Armchair, uses bright colors and simplified forms of a typical style to convert furniture into 2D. Armrests morph into a serpentine form which wrap around the back of the chair. Armchair is not an object to be looked at and evaluated from a distance, but is something to be felt, viewed, and experienced creatively. Warmth and imagination of Matisse's art spoke a message of hope for those who would listen. Matisse's painting, Red Studio, was inspired by an exhibition of Islamic art for one color. Subjects of the art on display in the room are less important than the fact that they represent patterns on the surface. One or two overlap, but as a whole they exist as individual artifacts connected by red paint. Because of the color, only the paintings depicted in the image, which are his own paintings, have a sense of tangibility. The nudes lead the eye around the room from left to right. The angle of the table and chair suggests recession, and the propped-up paintings show that it flattens out in the back. The idea of painting is suggested, allowing an empty frame to capture a portion of red. The only sign of art is the open box of crayons. The Fauves were led by Henri Matisse. Matisse allowed himself to experience Neo-Impressionism firsthand and met with Signac. He experimented with Post-Impressionism and Neo-Impressionism before arriving at Fauvism. He discovered manifold artistic movements that coexisted or succeeded one another on the dynamic artistic scene, such as Neoclassicism, Realism, Impressionism, Neo-Impressionism, and he began to experiment with a diversity of styles, employing new kinds of brushwork and light to create his own pictorial language. The entire struggle of Fauvism for Matisse boils down to fighting harder for the recognition of the new modern art movement. He was prepared to dispense of the group identity once it was established and recognizable.
So I'm going to talk about Georges Rouault. He was one of the most important painters of the Fauvist movement, but he was unique because he was the only one who was openly religious. However, instead of painting praise of his religion, Rouault chose to focus on suffering, tying it into the suffering that Jesus Christ endured. And here we have an example, Christ mocked by him and also Christ on the cross. His paintings involved Jesus and crucifixion, but the ones that didn't include religious symbols followed the same idea. He painted the dregs of society, like prostitutes and clowns, in an effort to show modern-day suffering and shame of the oppressed, and draw a parallel between it and the suffering of Jesus Christ. And here is pictured one of his paintings called Are We Not All Slaves? Rouault mostly painted misfits and vagabonds, including prostitutes and circus players. In 1907, in the prime of the Fauvist period, he did a series on courts, clowns, and prostitutes. Some works included in this series were Whore Leaning on Elbows, also known as Coyness or the Procuress, The Accused, which shows a court scene, Judge, Two Clowns, and Bathers. Rouault, dedicated to depicting modern suffering and oppression, chose each of these subjects for a reason. He chose courts because he saw judges as priests of a false religion, or the oppressors. He always showed them as mean or in a dark light. He chose clowns because of the misery circus performers seemed to show. They are the symbol of human suffering. He chose to paint prostitutes for much the same reason. He was dedicated to showcasing human misery, and painting prostitutes was a perfect way to translate his horror onto canvas. In Whores, painted in 1905, the shadowed faces and slumped postures of the prostitutes get the message across perfectly. Rouault is also known for his tendency to always use lines when creating figures. He was the only Fauvist artist to do this. It's really obvious in this painting called Jesus and the Doctors. You can see the thick black lines that he used to make his outlines. When he was a young man, Rouault apprenticed as a glazier, restoring stained glass windows. This led to the stained glass black outlines that characterized his paintings. This could also be homage to his religion, since stained glass windows are commonly found in churches. In his early career, Rouault was taught by Gustave Moreau, a French symbolist painter. This most likely explains why Rouault's earliest paintings use heavy symbolism. In this painting, The Way to Calvary, completed in 1891, Rouault used heavy religious symbolism. We can see the fallen cross and Jesus Christ. It wasn't until later that Rouault began experimenting with other, non-religious subjects. He also showed the influence of Paul Cézanne. The colors were bold and intense, but they lacked the joyousness of Matisse's paintings. This is a painting by Cézanne titled Mont Sainte-Victoire, which showcases the bright color choices that inspired Rouault. Rouault had a completely individual style, which he self-titled Outrageous Lyricism. He created the appearance of spontaneity with clashing brush marks to create a work of art that bombarded the eye. This occurred during the Fauvist period. As you can see in A Parade, painted in 1903, the work is aggressive and random, with bright splats of color and an unrestrained feel. However, after Fauvism's reign had ended, and as Rouault's art matured, his style became more harmonious. In 1918, Rouault painted Nude Woman. The difference between Nude Woman and A Parade almost makes you wonder if the two paintings were created by the same person. The latter has a much more calming effect on the eye. Alright, so to finish up with Rouault, I'm going to analyze some of his Fauvist paintings. Though he's best known for Fauvism, he had a very long, illustrious career, of which Fauvism was only a small, albeit essential, part. Disputably, his most important Fauvist works were the ones he did of courts, clowns, and prostitutes. I'm going to start with a painting called Father and Child. It was painted in 1905, during the prime of the Fauvist period. It goes by two names. It has also been called Clown and Child. This is interesting because you usually think of clowns as the job. You don't think of them interacting with their own children, just other people's children. This alone is an interesting insight into the world of entertainers, and not a very positive one. The dark, seedy, alley-like background gives the scene a melancholy air, although one would associate interacting with your children as a positive experience. The clown's face is also deeply in shadow, and the harsh lines make him seem malevolent and angry. The child looks uncomfortable there in his father's arms. He seems to be sitting precariously on the father's knee, and the angle of his body suggests that he is possibly trying to get out of his father's embrace. The bright colors of the two characters, the father and the child, set them apart from the dark background, making it obvious that they are to be the focus of the painting. The clown is wearing red, and the child is wearing yellow. Both are visually appealing colors, but they create an odd clashing effect, or a feeling of strife, when they're juxtaposed so closely against the dark background. The overall result is one of unease, not of companionship or love. The next painting I'm going to analyze is titled simply The Court. It was painted in 1908. Given our background knowledge of Rouault's opinion towards the court proceedings and judges, he thought of them as malevolent priests of a false religion. We can infer that this court will not be cast in a positive light. Rouault does not disappoint. This picture shows 3 court members, grouped closely together, wearing red robes. Just like in Father and Child, the color red evokes a strong emotion. However, unlike in Father and Child, when the red was set against a dark background, in this one it's set against a white background. And perhaps the white background is supposed to represent the so-called purity, quote, of the justice system. Obviously, Rouault did not agree with this. The shadowed faces and hunched, secretive postures of the court members serve to contradict this idea. It seems that they are most likely serving their own interests and are not trying to uphold justice simply to uphold justice. Finally, I'm going to analyze Bathers, which Rouault painted in 1908. To me, this is one of his works that keeps most with the principles of Fauvism. Many of his works are darker and gloomier, like the ones he did of clowns and of prostitutes and of the court as well. But this one, even though it involves prostitutes, it has the bright colors and simplified figures that help distinguish Fauvism from other types of art. Rouault's trademark black lines are present in this painting, like in all of them, but they're much more suggestive than definitive, unlike in his other paintings. They don't outline everything, they just outline some key parts of each of the women, so that you know where she is and to separate her from the background. The lack of lines to ground everything in place contributes to the airy, light feel of this work. It's much less social criticism and much more observation and experimentation with color to express emotion. The airy clouds and suggestion of the mountain in the background are light-colored and vague, so that the furthest bather almost blends into the background. As you can see, there are 3 bathers. The closer to the viewpoint the bather is, the more detail is put into her figure. You can see the hair and the curve of the arm of the woman in the middle. Of the woman in the back, you can see almost nothing, just the faint suggestion that she's there. While for the woman in front, you can see her cheekbones, her nose, and her entire body. It helps to draw the viewer in by painting everything through human eyes, with not everything being perfectly in focus as it would be in a photograph. In this painting, Rouault shows his mastery of the movement and the ease with which he paints. Georges Rouault was a wonderful addition to the ranks of Fauvist artists. His bold color choices and expressive brushwork created an enduring legacy. Though he moved on to other pursuits, Rouault never lost his interest in color. Towards the end of his career, he experimented with laying colors to build areas of deep, vibrant pigment. Rouault was also a perfectionist. He never felt as though any of his art was finished, no matter how long he spent on a painting. Studying his work led German artists to begin Expressionism. Rouault died February 13, 1958, in Paris.
Maurice de Vlaminck was born on April 4th, 1876, to a musician family. His father was a pianist, violinist, and tenor, and his mother was also a pianist. Due to his parents' professions, he did work as a young adult, playing the violin and teaching violin lessons. He was physically intimidating and red-haired. He wore bright colors and gaudy neckties, which showed that he really liked color. He got typhus, which stopped him from working physically demanding jobs and changed his life. In 1872, he began to take an interest in painting, and he was a self-taught artist. From 1900 to 1901, he shared a studio in Chateau, Paris, with André Derain. It is said that his nature, character, and tastes and way of life were in perfect harmony with the freedom, daring, and violence of his painting. He called himself a tender-hearted savage, full of violence, and professed that he tried to paint with his heart and his guts without bothering with style. His Fauvism period lasted only 7 years, but he is best known for it. When he began to paint, it wasn't for money. He was just interested in art. His main inspiration was from attending a Van Gogh exhibition. He was even influenced by Impressionists. Directly after the Van Gogh visit, he began painting, quote, from the tube. This made the colors of his paintings more colorful and expressive. Derain motivated him and cemented his path as an artist. Vlaminck, Derain, and Matisse participated in Salon d'Automne, where their art was compared with the Renaissance. The sculptures in the middle of the room juxtaposed their work and caused a public outcry. Vlaminck said, quote, "Painters are born, not made," and he only took himself seriously after meeting Derain. By 1907, Vlaminck drifted away from Fauvism. He incorporated more structure into his landscapes, and as he was influenced by Paul Cézanne, his colors became more muted and contemplative. Vlaminck's technique was unique. He had a commitment to open air and landscape. He developed a more naturalistic treatment of landscape, retaining his vigorous style but using more color. Even though subject matter was unimportant, country roads appear in his paintings, and he also loads skies with the threat of a storm. Repetition of same effects eventually became somewhat theatrical and melodramatic. The use of color gave way to concern with structure and also developed a dramatic view of the landscape. He declared instinct and talent the only essentials for painting. He remained consistently hostile to the most avant-garde Cubism, but prior to World War I, his art was considered Cubist. His loose brushwork inspired abstract expressionism during the late 1940s and 1950s, though he despised the abstract art. He used broad, turbulent brushstrokes and a kind of photo-expressionism. By 1906, he did not know how else to develop his art, and he maxed out his intensity. His most famous paintings were Man Smoking a Pipe, Portrait of Derain, Potato Pickers, Self-Portrait, The Red Tractor, Red Trees, and Still Life. Portrait of Derain conveys urgency, and he did no correcting or retouching. He had no pretense or mask, and it was incredibly raw. In his painting, Fields recalls work of Monet or Sisley. His cursive drawing style is pure Van Gogh. He used pure colors straight from the tube, and he heightened tones to transform a potentially tame scene of a French suburban countryside into a firework display. This may appear exquisite and charming, but we can still imagine how this energy might have struck the public of its day as crude and primitive. Vlaminck's Potato Pickers was also a famous work. It is a very small painting, only 46 by 53 centimeters. I think it's small because it's very complex with his colors and mood. The painting shows 4 farmers out in a potato field, obviously picking potatoes. The farmers are all wearing white shirts with blue jeans, and 2 of them have on hats. Only one farmer is bending down to pick potatoes, with the other one standing around watching him. This reminds me of the end of a long day when you don't really feel like doing anything more. You just want someone else to get the work done. The colors of the soil beneath the farmers are very confusing. The green probably represents the top of the potato, with the easily grabbed leaves and stems sticking out of the ground. The dark and light brown shows the soil as it was disrupted by previously picked potatoes. The bright yellow with streaks of red is most likely wheat being grown next to the potato field, so the pickers are right on the edge of the potato portion of the cropland. In the background sky isn't a summery bright blue, but a darker tone. This perfectly reflects Vlaminck's style of adding in an impending storm or other unpleasant weather. The bend of the supposed wheat field and trees in the background make it feel like the wind is blowing in some weather. The next painting by Vlaminck I'm going to talk about is Portrait of Derain. We know that Derain and Vlaminck had a very close relationship, so it only seemed likely for him to do a portrait of Derain. Derain was naturally slim, elegant, with a lively color and black hair. He always had a pipe in his mouth and was a cold-hearted arguer. I think that Vlaminck's painting of him contradicts this. Although he is shown with the pipe in his mouth under his famous mustache, Vlaminck paints his face with reds, oranges, and other warm colors. Maybe he did this because they were friends and he could look past Derain's rough personality. As a Fauvis painting, we can clearly see the blotted brushwork through this whole painting. Vlaminck even mixes a little bit of blue and white around Derain's shoulders and tie to show that he may be leaning forward a little bit, creating a shadow. This shows that there is more complexity to Fauvis paintings rather than just a bunch of thick colors.
Okay, it's recording. André Derain was influenced by Neo-Impressionism, which he was exposed to through Paul Signac. In 1901, he was very impressed by Vincent van Gogh and loved the retrospective at the Bernheim June Gallery in Paris. He rejected engineering to study as an artist and attended painting classes under Eugène Camure, a French symbolist artist. His studies in art were put on hold between 1901 and 1904 when he was conscripted into the army, and he emerged more determined than ever to be an artist. He studied for a summer in 1905 with Henri Matisse, and when they were together at Courrières, they sought to express the simplicity and rawness of life in the Mediterranean. He later worked with Vlaminck in Chatou, near Paris, at the School of Chatou. He was commissioned in 1906 to London cityscape paintings and reinterpreted the Liver Thames. Duran's style often had a balancing line mass that held together the image, and he sought deliberate disharmonies in his work, where Matisse worked for harmony. He used dabs of color to obtain the effects of light in their depictions of a Mediterranean landscape. Oftentimes, Duran worked with traditional subject matter that he presented with bright colors, which he applied in fragmented blocks. Charing Cross Bridge, London, 1906. The street and buildings are painted in large flat tones, while the changing sky and water are treated in small, fragmented touches reminiscent of the neo-impressionist style. The forms of the vehicles are distorted, their silhouettes echoing the curb of the Victoria Embankment to give a sensation of speed. Fishing Boats, Coyeur, 1905. In this painting, made at Coyeur, Duran's heavily outlined forms present a dense, all-over pattern dominated by the overlapping sails that cross the picture diagonally. At the lower left, two figures watch the fishermen at work on the shore. Beyond the multicolored sails are the sea, rising mountains, and a brief expanse of sky. The topography of the landscape can be identified, but Duran attempts no verisimilitude of space or color. This painting was made at a small Mediterranean shipping port and shows vivid colors and broken brushwork typical of a Fauvist painter. The Pool of London, 1906. This painting uses the conflict between warm and cool colors to express the noise and activity of this busy dockyard. An illusion of depth in the painting is created by using stronger and warmer tones in the foreground, which gradually become weaker and cooler towards the background. The drawing of the image is typically simplified into shapes and forms whose details can be conveyed by unmodified brushstrokes of roughly the same size. This gives the painting an overall unity that you would not expect in a composition of such conflicting colors. Portrait of Henri Matisse, 1906. This work was made during a holiday at the fishing port of Coyeur in the south of France in 1905, when Matisse and Duran painted portraits of each other. Under Matisse's influence, Duran had begun to use strong, non-naturalistic colors, applied in small separate brushstrokes to convey the sensations of light and shade. In their time spent at Coyeur, Matisse and Duran sought to look at the intensity of color and not just the naturalistic world around them, but they sought to bring out the emotion and the expression in color. And they painted very many images of the boats at the ports, and for a significant painting called Mountains at Coyeur, Duran actually turned away from the ports and looked at the steep hills of the Pyrenees and the olive groves that were behind them. He used a variety of brushstrokes to show the ruggedness of the landscape. You have twisting lines that form the trunks of the olive trees, and Duran's bold separated stripes of blues, grays, and greens create a rhythmic pattern of leaves ready to wave in a breeze the way olive trees do, giving the painting movement and involving the viewer in it. Now, looking at the mountains and the sky, he used broad, sweeping strokes of color to form the mountains rising behind the trees, and you get this conflict of just the sweeping and the ease, and then the harsher brushstrokes, and it gave a sense of immediacy to the foreground and peace to the background. Duran's works made through the Fauvist movement had an incredible impact on art of the early 1900s, but by 1906, as the Fauvists began to branch out, he would meet Pablo Picasso and develop a lasting friendship with him. His style began to become more cubist, as seen in his illustration, Cubist Grove. This painting is distinctly cubist more in its color choices than its subject or presentation, but is indicative of a clear departure from the wild, untamed Fauvist style.
So to finish up talking about Henri Matisse, I'm going to take a closer look at two of his paintings to point out some of the characteristics, especially the ones that make it a Fauvist piece of work. I'll start out talking about Caillou, which was painted in 1905. Caillou is the name of a town in southern France, and it seemed to have inspired Matisse immensely. He has created many landscape paintings of Caillou. The landscape is less of a landscape and more of an explosion of color. You can only barely see the outlines of the trees, a hint of the path wandering through them, and the slight gray glimpse of something bluish-gray, maybe a body of water in the background. The colors are light gray and cheery, true to Fauvism. Looking at the painting gives the viewer a sense of tranquility and happiness. You might be in a garden or walking along a sunny path. Matisse showed expert understanding of the principles of Fauvism here. He used colors not as a way to describe the scene, but as a way to enhance it by giving it a feeling of tranquility and joy. The colors are by nature bright, but they seem somewhat muted in this painting, probably so the viewer isn't overwhelmed by the clashing yellow, red, and green. By keeping the colors weak, Matisse made sure that the scene had the desired effect. Matisse enjoyed painting landscapes. A big chunk of his paintings consisted of landscapes. Matisse did paint humans, but not in a natural everyday pose. He used models, but in unpreplanned poses. Unlike the other Fauvist artists, Matisse was also very interested in painting still lifes. He did quite a few during the Fauvist era, including parrot tulips, vase, bottle, and fruit, and blue still life. The next and last painting by Matisse I'm going to talk about is called Bathers with a Turtle. It was painted in 1908, and it reminds me a lot of his two other works, Music and Dance. In all three, there are three elements: the sky, the land, and a group of naked humans. What's fascinating about this painting is that the position of the bathers exactly mimics those of the bathers in a painting he did before called Three Bathers. It's obvious that this was done for a reason, but the question is, why? The answer may have to do with the size. Three Bathers is of medium size, maybe 2 feet by 1.5 feet. However, Bathers with a Turtle is noticeably larger, bigger than 5 feet by 5 feet. Perhaps Matisse was inspired by the poses in Three Bathers and wanted to go into more detail with larger canvas. Bathers with a Turtle has some more detail with the people by Fauvist standards. However, there is some detail in the human figures. The background was two-toned at best, while in Three Bathers, the background is more detailed than the humans. Solid navy blue on top, teal on bottom, fading to a light green at the very bottom of the edge of the painting. This is probably Matisse's way of keeping harmony within the painting. The people are flesh-colored and plain, so why make the background more elaborate? Keeping it simple ties the piece together. The mellow, muted colors give the viewers a sense of tranquility, and the postures of the bathers show surprise and discovery, while the light green around the turtle puts focus on it, making it the object of discovery. This is what Matisse was about, creating visual beauty through harmony and simplicity and using colors to tell a story.